She said, I'll be home later. And the next morning, my husband got up. When he got up, he said, Laurie's not home.
Then it was exactly about 10 days later is whenever her body was discovered.
And I took the crime scene photos.
It was July, hot, and her body was in terrible shape when it was discovered. It was decomposed. It was already mummified. She was so bad shape that they couldn't even tell if she'd even been raped or anything because her body's in such bad shape. What the medical examiner's office determined was she died of suffocation.
They poked her sock down her throat. And that's what killed her. Strangled her, choked her to death.
Jack Tanner was the undersheriff, which is the head deputy.
We were in the hallway of the sheriff's department. And he said, well, Ms. Long said, we don't have any money to continue the investigation of Laurie's murder. He wanted us to give him money. I know that's what he wanted.
A couple of officers went down to Texas to go interview him in prison to see if there was a possibility he may have come through Claremore to commit this crime.
I know they went down there. Jack Tanner and Bob Colbert, he was a detective on Claremore PD at the time, went down there.
And then if you read the interview, it was a perfect example when you teach an officer at the police academy on how not to interview, because they were like leading questions.
The DA said, there's no way we've got enough to file charges on him.
There was a friend of mine who was an FBI agent who was getting ready to go off to a training session in Dallas on profiling. And I asked him if he would mind taking her case file with him, and maybe him and his instructor could look it over and see what they thought. In his opinion, the kind of person we were looking for was somebody of an authoritative figure, and probably an athletic type guy, and that he was also probably a good old country boy. He probably wore bib overalls and an old straw cowboy hat, and that he probably drove an old pickup truck, and lived in an old mobile home or a trailer. It was the anniversary of Laura's death coming up. I think it was the 20th anniversary of her death was coming up. That we put a big deal out in the newspapers and in the press, everybody to let them know that we're reopening the case because of the new technology, the new DNA stuff, new lab stuff. It was probably about maybe 3 or 4 days or a week later, I got an anonymous letter addressed to me.
Only child. Well, I lost 2 before her and 1 after her. My first husband beat me up with his knee in my stomach, and a day or 2 later I lost the baby. So I think that made my uterus weak to where I couldn't, he said it just tips. So that's when it gets any weight on it. So I was lucky to have her. That's what they told me, So that was God, I think, helping me. She wore glasses, and she'd got that was when the big glasses were in style, And she was real friendly, but she was too shy to just walk up and start talking to you. She'd have to wait until either you made the move to talk to her. She was sitting in the car with her windows rolled up. This was in July, and it was a hot summertime. So she left them rolled up, and if anybody came up to talk to her, she'd just lower it about that, like that. That's why I don't know how he got her out of her car.
And Laura had kind of been on her own in a way. She lived at home, but she was working and going to school and had her own car and had her own social life, lots of friends. And
back then they had the big CB craze, because everybody had CBs in their car, and all the kids would communicate with them, each other, and talk and stuff.
And I forget what her handle was on CB radio, but she had visited a lot with everybody on the air. And she went to work for Paul Neely Insurance Company, I believe, as a secretary.
Paul told me, this was while she was alive, too, though. He said, that kid's got more brains and more smarts than all these women around us here. She loved it, and they loved her. And the guy that killed her was a customer there. That's how I knew who she was.
I got an anonymous letter addressed to me, and in it said that the person you're looking for, and they named the name of a person, and the reason why they said that he done it was because they worked with this man at the Peabody Coal Company, and that he had a habit of sneaking off the job, and they would cover for him. And he would come into Claremore, and then he'd hang around with the women and go out and party and stuff, and then sometimes before it was time to get off work, he'd sneak back on the job, and then he'd clock out, and everybody would cover for him. But on this particular night, he showed back up for work, and he had fresh scratch marks on his arms and his face, and he confided in this person that he had accidentally killed a woman. And I guess he made the person promise not to talk about it or whatever, but at that point, it was kept a secret all that time. And he said, you're going to find out that shortly after this woman was killed, that this gentleman sold his property to his brother, and that he left the state. And you're going to find out he was abusive to his wife, and we could check all this stuff out, but that he was the one that had killed Laura. So I presented the letter to my supervisor, and I said, I don't want to get too excited about it until we start verifying this information. And was able to verify pretty much everything that was said in the letter. It was a matter of locating this gentleman's ex-wife, and found out that she really didn't want to talk, but found out he was kind of abusive towards her, and that he did work at Peabody Coal Company. And I went and got records of the employees and did interviews. And I talked to his crew and found out that everything was correct at what this man had told me at that point in time. After we developed a possible good suspect, one of the things I wanted to do was I was able to locate where he was staying at. He was staying out on a lady's property out there in Spavinal, Oklahoma. So I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and do an interview with him and see where we go with that. And so what happened was I drove down to the place, and when I pulled up, it was an old mobile home, a beat-up mobile home that he was staying in. And there was the old pickup truck. And then you knock on the door, and he answers the door, and there he is in his bib overalls. And he didn't have his straw cowboy hat, but it was over there, and he invited me in to talk to him. And at one point, he was a pitcher on a pitching farm for the St. Louis Cardinals. So he was matching up pretty much everything that the profiler guy said about, he's athletic, he's an old country boy, everything right down the line. But he invites me into his home. He has to move a gun out of a chair for me to sit down. And we talk to him. I talk to him about Laura. And every time I ask him about Laura, he answers it in this way, that I don't know anything about it. And at that point in time, after I had my conversation with him, I asked him if he'd be willing to take a polygraph test, and he said that he would. We did the polygraph test. I waited at least a couple of days before I brought him back into the police department to tell him about the results of his polygraph. I informed him there at that point in time that he had flunked the polygraph. Whenever the polygraph examiner asked him specifically if he caused any harm to Laura Long, he went off the scale on being deceptive on that question.
I'm Dan Rather, and this is 48 Hours.
I didn't realize that the television show 48 Hours monitors all news because I guess it got on the internet about the news articles. And back then I was contacted by the 48 Hours producer, and they said they were interested in doing a story on it.
Her daughter's murder was never solved. She still wants an answer.
I'd like to know why or who.
And so do the police.
We'd like to get it solved.
Can new clues help them track down the killer at last? Susan Spencer is on the case.
Now, with the new possibilities of DNA, the clues in the anonymous letters, and at last a suspect, this cold trail may finally be getting warmer.
Well, all I can do then is pray that God will see it through, because that's all I've had up to now.
But Ima Long has waited 20 years to learn who killed her daughter. She doesn't mind waiting a little longer.
I'm Dan Rather, and that's 48 Hours.
After that show aired, is when we got a call again from the Montel Williams show.
My next guest can relate to the pain that the Moxley family has gone through. The Laura Long case was another unsolved murder dating all the way back to 1977. Laura Long was an 18-year-old woman from Claremore, Oklahoma, who left to get gas one night on July 10th and has never returned. Please welcome Laura's mother, Ima, to the show, and also Detective Tim Morris. Welcome them both to the show.
We anticipate there's probably 2 to 3 people that was involved in this or helped cover this up.
So why not go back now? I'm sorry, it seems stupid to ask, but you go back now and get those 3 or 4 people and, stick them. I don't know, why can't police stick them in a cell for a while, lock the door and just say, when you're ready to talk, I'll let you. I'm sorry. Well, why can't you go and just browbeat them a little bit to get them to say something?
Well, we went back and got the employee list from that company, and we have started doing it. We started doing interviews with old employees to see who the possibility is of the letter writer.
Let me take a little break. We'll be back right after this.
We actually got 2 more letters after that one, and you could tell in his letter, his last letter, he was getting frustrated. He wanted to know why we hadn't made an arrest yet. And when I went to his house, to this gentleman's house, and I told him who I was with the police department, the first thing out of his mouth was, "Hey, I know exactly what you're here for." He proceeded to tell me word for word that was in every bit in that very first letter. And when I asked him, I said, "Did you write that letter?" And he said, "No." But at that time, he's frail. He had that black lung disease from where he's working in the coal mines.
But about that time, the person who wrote the anonymous letter died.
And that man, whoever that man was that wrote the letter, if he'd have signed his name, that would have been a way to get through it all and over with. But.
And who do you believe killed Laura?
My gut feeling is Mr. Dykeman did. The gentleman that we were informed of was a gentleman by the name of Bill Dykeman. And even when I was going through the OSBI reports that were made back then and stuff, I saw where they went and interviewed his brother Jimmy Dykeman at his home about Bill. And Jimmy explained to the OSBI back then, he said there's no way that it could have been Bill, that he was home with him at that time because his truck was broken down. So there's no way he could have been involved. But there was nothing in the report to indicate why they were looking for Bill or how his name come up. That was kind of strange. And it was after he took the polygraph test, he had went and told his brother Jimmy about him taking the polygraph. And Jimmy got upset and went to the police department to look for me to have a discussion with me, but I wasn't there at the time. So he talked to Chief Perry and wanted to know why I was harassing Bill and why I was having to take a polygraph test. And then he said to Chief Perry, well, there's no way it could have been Bill because he had flown out on American Airlines, and was out of state at the time that incident occurred, which was back in 1977 when it was fresher on his mind. He said, no, Bill was home with him. So yeah, he did change his story back then.
And he had 2 kids, but his wife divorced him, and they said that's why he hated women. Took it all out on all women. So all of this was hearsay because I didn't ever know anything about it. That's just what I was told.
But before that happened too, I had talked to my chief, Chief Perry, about Mr. Dykeman, and he had known him for years and kind of find out he used to work for the Claremore Police Department. He used to check the parking meters in downtown Claremore.
Tony, I think he said he was around 35 or 40 years old. Laurie was 18. So, let's see. I have to get all of that back up in there.
Ima was just the stronger of the two. My personal opinion is that she was just so strong. Laura's dad was too. I got pretty well acquainted with him. It ruined him. She became perhaps stronger because of her intenseness on wanting the killer brought to justice. And he took a different path.
He got acquainted with this little waitress at it's like a quick trip or get and go or whatever they are. And began giving her money and buying her diapers for her baby, taking things for her kids. On my birthday in 1989, because I worked with him for about a year after that, he bought this lady a set of bed sheets. On my birthday, I didn't even get a card. And when I saw the charge slips and what was on it, I asked him where it was. Oh, I didn't do anything with them. Yeah, he lied to me about it. And when I found out that's where it went, I went berserk. I beat him up. He wore bruises for about 3 weeks. He wouldn't touch me. He was 60 and she was around 26 or 27 and had 3 kids. So anyway, when I told him I was leaving, he was just going crazy. He was just shaking it all over. And I said, well, sorry, you brought it on. But we did go to a therapy session 3 or 4 times, 4 or 5, whatever. It was a long time. It was a while anyway. And when the therapist asked me, well, what would it take for you to just forget? And I said, I don't think I'll ever forget. But really, if he would tell me why, that might help. Finally, he said, it was because she reminded me so much of Laura. I said, that's a crock. I don't think so. She was nothing like Laura. I don't believe it.
With Bill, he's a good old country boy, and he's been around Claremore his entire life. He knew a lot of history about the city. He could tell you about anything you need to know about back in those days. Well, what was interesting about his interviews as an investigator, when you conduct an interview, you watch how people's body language is and how they react, and especially how they answer your questions. Like I do everybody that's a possible suspect. I always advise them of their rights under the Miranda. And then I go into my spiel about how like with him, it's like, once you're a cop, you're always a cop with me. I'm help you out any way I can. I'll give you a break, whatever we can do at that point. So at that point, I presented it to him in this way, and that I didn't feel that he did it on purpose. That he cared for the young girl because the fact that he's lived around that area, he worked the coal pits, he knows all the places, caves, coal pits, ponds, anything that he could have hid the body in. But he'd put her on the side of the road. In fact, it was on the side of the road where he put her at was on the way to his place, to his property. And he put her there because he knew that she would be found at some point in time. So he didn't want her just totally disappeared. He wanted her family to at least find her and take care of her at that point. But it was strange the whole time that I'm talking to him and presenting it to him this way. He started in the upright position, but the more I talked to him, the more he started, actually physically leaning to it. And I thought, okay, he's getting ready to say something. He's getting ready to possibly admit that he had done this kind of thing. And at that point, once I presented everything to him, I asked him this question. I said, now, Bill, what do you want me to tell the district attorney's office? Do you want me to tell them that you intentionally killed this girl, or was it an accident, so we can do what we can do to help you? And all of a sudden, he just sat up and just said, I don't know nothing about it. Now, to me, an innocent person, when they would ask that question, he would say, I didn't do it. No more, I'm out of here, no nothing. But his answer was always, I don't know anything about it. So at that time, we're allowed to bluff a little bit. So I told him at that point, I said, Bill, I'm going to inform you that they found a hair when they were doing the autopsy and stuff at the ME's office, and they couldn't identify it. Would you mind giving me a sample of your hair? And so we can send it off to the lab. He said, yeah, no problem. So he plucked off his hair. He put it in an envelope, and he sealed it and signed it. So I said, I'll send it off to the lab, and we'll see what we can do about getting results. And I also asked him, too, if he'd be willing to give blood for DNA samples. And he signed a release saying he'd do that. And I took him to one of our local doctors, where I think we withdrew about 3 to 4 vials of his blood. So he was always cooperative with everything we did. So he went home. So I waited about a week, and I called him again and said, hey, Bill, can you come to the police department? We need to talk. And he said, no, I can't come in today. I said, okay, I want you to know that, because I'm giving you the courtesy again, that hair sample matched the hair that was found on her body. And that was just it. There was just total silence for about 3 or 4 seconds. And all of a sudden he just says out of the blue, well, if you got me, come and get me. But don't come on the property without a warrant.
Why would Laura have gotten in the car with Bill?
Oh, we're going to have to get into her reputation back then. I mean, which we had talked about earlier, but I'll go into that a little bit. But there's some things that her mom did not know about that we kept away from Mom at that point, because you understand, her mom thought Laura was a sweet little innocent girl. And from when I talked to Ima the very first time or stuff, she would explain to me that Laura would not talk to boys at all. That if she did, she'd be sitting in her car, and her window would be rolled down just so far, and the boy would be about 5 feet from the door. But during the course of our interviews, and the interviews that I saw for the OSBI report, that she made the rounds, that she had sex with several boys back in that time. And we talked to one kid that said he come home one day and Laura was in his bed naked and said, hey, here's your birthday present, that kind of thing. So she got around a little bit. So that's possibly maybe why. I mean, it may have been one of the deals where she just wanted to hook up with him, and that was presented to him, Bill, when I first talked. One of the times I talked to him, that maybe they hooked up that night, and they were out thinking things were going to happen, and maybe she changed her mind at the last minute after getting him all worked up and stuff, and he just got carried away. So,
I was told at the time, of course, you get varying reports from different people, whether they liked her or they didn't like her, or her parents or whatever. And like I say, she liked to visit with people on the CB radio, and I heard back then that she would contact truckers on the turnpike or wherever that came over the air and visit with them. Now, whether anything ever came of those, I don't know. There was other people that said she was a very sweet, very nice girl, and I didn't hear anything hardly bad about her at all.
It was a rumor mill, as you would expect, I guess.
I had one little girl from Claremore tell me, and I don't know who she was, or I don't think Laurie even knew her. She told me, you need to have the county get grand jury to investigate the sheriff's department. So whether she knew something, I don't know.
Well, Jack Tanner was, back then, was the sheriff of Rogers County then. And I know that he was kind of involved in the investigation a little bit, and that he was also related to this gentleman in question, that he was like a second cousin to this gentleman that we were developing as a possible suspect.
There was a rumor at the time that Jack Tanner, being Bill Dykeman's cousin, somehow kept him out of jail.
Jack Tanner fixed it to where nobody would even talk about this. I mean, my dog hated him. He'd come up and the dog would be barking, "Come get that dog out of my way." Couldn't come in because she wouldn't let him. So should have paid more attention to her.
And I know at some point we found out later that Jack did have a little bit of the evidence from the case at his home that he eventually turned over to the new sheriff of Rogers County back there, which is Sheriff Prather. The piece of evidence that Mr. Tanner had was an index box that had all these index cards of everybody that was interviewed in her case at that time. But in reviewing all those those index cards, I did not see Mr. Dykeman or anywhere as even being interviewed.
Tanner would come out, once every 2 or 3 weeks or a month and tell us, well, we haven't got anywhere, or we don't have any more money. That's mainly he was coming out for money. And I know that's what he was, because he didn't tell us anything. And he knew all along. He knew the day that she was missing. Sunday morning, he knew that that guy had already killed her. And knew all of it. I know he did, because the way it was done.
I know they went down there. Jack Tanner and Bob Colbert, he was a detective on Claremore PD at the time, went down there.
They were asking this person, like, could she have been wearing a halter top? Could she have been doing this or anything? Practically giving them the answers. And I don't understand how he got involved or why, but Jimmy Dykeman, Bill Dykeman's brother, was the one who drove the two officers down to the Texas prison. And I didn't understand why that occurred, because he's not a member of law enforcement. I'm sure the police department back in then had their own police cars so they could drove down there on their own to do the interview. But it was just very strange that of all people that drove him down there was Jimmy Dykeman. And that always bugged me, why.
But I do know that the three, Bill and the two he worked with, his brother, and this man, Jack, was the 5 that knew all along who killed her. And not one of them. I called it the brotherhood of man. Men wouldn't talk about each other. So to me, they're just about as guilty as he is, because they knew and didn't do anything about it.
I couldn't contact him at that point, and I didn't have any evidence in order, to present to a DA at that point. And to be honest with the stuff being scattered out and all this stuff, as much time has gone by and nobody knows who's all handled what evidence, I doubt if it'll ever get to the point where it'll ever be prosecuted. So I waited a while, and I thought, well, maybe it's just me that I'm just not reading this man right. So I contacted a guy named John Huntington, who was the polygraph examiner. I've worked with him on several cases. He's an OSBI agent. So I told him I would drive him out there, and I said, there's a possibility he may not even allow us on his property, because he told me not to come on the property anymore without a warrant. So we drove down there and knocked on Bill's door, and he opened the door and invited us in and said, come on in. And what John did was he just we sat there on the couch and stuff, and he looked at Bill and says, look, Bill, this is my card. And he said, look, we're not here to harass you. Tim's not here to harass you at all. We're just here to talk to you. He said, we're here, and he held up a picture of Laura and said, we're just here to find a closure for this mother so she would know what happened to her daughter and why. He says, I've had people that will get sick, or sometimes their conscience will get to them. Sometimes they'll just write me a letter, explain to me about stuff. And it's a good way to help her and help you in the long run. He said, we're not going to do anything here. I'm just going to give you my little spill. We'll talk about this. If you want to say anything, now's the time to do it. Or after we leave, you can write me a letter. You know, you got my business card. It's got my address on it. Anything you want to do, we would appreciate it. We thank you. And the whole time that John is talking to him, he's just sitting there sipping his coffee, not saying a word. And we thanked him for his time, and he walked us to the door, and at that point in time, we just left, and we just kind of looked at each other and says, wow. Because the fact, you know, any other person would probably say, why are we doing this again? You know, why are you harassing me? I've already told you I didn't do it or anything, but not him. He didn't say a word. It was just like he's in another world there for a little bit. So, and that was pretty much almost the last time I saw and talked to Bill Dykeman.
When he died, did that affect Iva at all?
Well, I knew it would. I did not make any effort to talk with her. Didn't make any effort to talk with her. I knew that it would affect her, and I don't think I even talked to Tim Norris. Can't recall, but I don't think I even talked to Tim Norris. But I did hear that there was something she wanted to do.
What I did do, I told the undertaker over there when he was in the mortuary that it was all I could do to keep from coming over there and just ruin your deal on what he looked like, because I beat him to death, beat him up. And I said, but I couldn't do that because he was already dead. But I was willing to go over there, and same way with Jack Tanner. And
she was talked out of it, which I'm glad she didn't do it. Whatever, if what I was told, I'm glad that she did not. I'm glad she did not do that, because she is a bigger and stronger person than that. And I don't know if I could have resisted if it'd been my child.
I think they should pay for what they do. I know God will take care of them, but I don't think it's fair to the people that are left that don't see that they're really taken care of. I hope God forgives him, but I don't know that I ever can. But God says you have to forgive them. But I don't know. That's as close as I can come. I think he was just, I can't even imagine what you would call him. Scum? I don't know.
So, how do you think the police department handled this case?
Poorly, and not at all.
I believe it was handled as good as it could have possibly been with what little information we had. And there were several serial killers through the years that we interviewed and that we thought might have been in Claremore at the time. And I really had fun on the police department. It was a good job. I really liked it.
There's so many variables to everything. You know, it depends on, you don't, the fact is you didn't come up with any witnesses that saw her get into anything, or, there's always going to be something that's going to fall through the cracks, especially on something like this.
Oh, brother, was I ever changed? The thing that changed me the most was I would take the chance, any other time, I would take the chance of embarrassing a child by putting in the paper that they'd gone off with somebody who'd spent the night. Then I would take a chance that they'd their lives were in danger. That changed me forever, and changed our newspaper policy whenever I was, for the rest of the length of time that I was there. And it also, I think it changed a little bit our relationship with the police department, not with the investigators, because they knew how really sincere we were about it. But I think it made maybe some people at the police department at that time feel like that we were breathing down their neck.
They still get calls. There was just, what was it, I think 2 months ago, some guy called my daughter, and she lives in Yukon, Oklahoma, trying to get a hold of me. He said he had information, and he's like a prison guard in Missouri. And so I just turned it over to the police department and let them do the rest. So they're still getting tips. That's why today we still, every once in a while, we'll still go in and have meetings just so because with the officers here that are retiring, they're bringing in new people, and we want to get them up to speed. And in fact, the last meeting we had, we all showed up there at the police department, and come to find out, whenever they built a new courthouse here, and the DA's was going through stuff, and their DA investigator was going through stuff in an old closet, and found a whole stack full of people that were interviewed on her case that nobody knew about. So they're still coming with more information that we were going through this stuff and thinking, oh my God, why didn't we have this information back then? It's again where people not sharing things, and they're putting stuff away and not telling other people about it.
Say something to Laura, what would it be?
That I love her. I know she knew I loved her, and I miss her more than words could say. And I don't have any more tears, but I could cry inside.